Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Pedalshift Project. The Pedalshift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments on bicycle travel adventures. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride, let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/342, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshift.net or text me at 202-930-1109 and check Pedalshift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 342nd edition of the Pedalshift Project. My name's Tim Mooney. Thanks so much for joining. On this edition, we are going to do another topical episode talking about the distinctions between riding solo and riding in a group. And I think this goes across all of the various types of bicycle travel, whether we're talking about bike packing, bike touring, and everything in any other type of bicycle travel that you're thinking about. So we'll start off with the thing that I'm at least a little bit more familiar with, and that is solo riding. And the two words that come to mind when I say solo riding is freedom, number one, and independence, number two. Freedom, because I think that there is more of a sense of freedom for me, at least when I am riding solo, in that there is absolutely nothing that is encumbering me whatsoever. It is all about my choices and my desires when it comes to planning the ride, when it comes to executing the ride. Everything is all completely and 100% in my own headspace. The other thing, word independence, I think also goes a little bit more towards what your responsibilities are and how you are solely responsible for everything that comes around. So you are independent, you have freedom, but your independence also comes with some costs to that as well. As an independent solo rider, you are the one that's responsible for getting yourself out of fixes. You are the one that is going to be carrying everything that is necessary for you. So freedom and independence, while they may seem like they're the same thing, I do think that they're in some ways two sides of the same coin, but they are also really, really helpful descriptors of what is the upsides and the downsides of solo riding. As I was preparing my thoughts for solo riding, I realized that there were a lot of things that I didn't consciously think about when I decide to go out on a solo ride. But I think that the idea of the opportunities that are there when you're in your own head and when you are not forced to or going to be speaking with anybody for long stretches of time, as it would be true in any type of bicycle travel when you're going solo, there's some real opportunity for self-discovery. I think when you're in your head that much, that may be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on your perspective, but also a lot of area for personal growth and the ability to maybe solve some problems that you've got in your head, or maybe find different solutions to things that have been troubling you. I think that that's a really wonderful element about solo touring, especially for those of us who live with other folks, have different responsibilities. When you go on a bicycle adventure, there really is an opportunity for yourself to separate yourself from all of that and give yourself the gift that you don't tend to be able to give yourself that often, and that is time to mull things over. And it may be mundane things, and it may be really important things that you need to suss out in your own head. Sometimes I just find that gift of time without interruption can be a really helpful thing. Now, of course, you're always going to be focused in on the ride itself and the things that you need to do around that. But yeah, there is some degree of, I don't know, monotony is the wrong word, but there's real open spaces where, as you pedal rhythmically, your mind goes to different places. And sure, we occupy that from time to time with music or with podcasts or other things like that. But I definitely find that rhythmic pedaling up and down, it really puts your mind into a different place. And I think that's a very different vibe than when you're pedaling and talking with somebody, which can make the miles go even faster. But it is a different vibe. And I do think it's something to consider as part of your choice between solo and group riding. I think that there are a ton of different advantages to solo riding, and nowhere more important is it's just much easier to plan. You're not scheduling any kind of coordination with other riders in any way, shape, or form. And that's on everything. That's the getting to the beginning of your ride, the middle of the ride, the end of the ride, all of those things. When you're going yourself, there's no other considerations in terms of scheduling. And as somebody who does this mostly solo, I can't imagine how difficult that would be. In a recent trip that I did, of course, I met up with Mysterious James, and we had very vague plans in terms of the meetup, but we knew exactly where it was going to be, but no specific time. That made it a lot easier, but even that extra element in there meant, okay, well, I had to time my arrival in a very particular way. If things had gone sideways in any of the towns further north from there, that would have impacted those plans. So the coordination, even with someone as very chill as that, and the plans were very chill, there's still an added layer to that. So I do think that solo riding is much easier to plan, including contingencies around those rides. I also think it is much easier to pace a solo ride. I have a very good sense of my own riding speed and how much I have in me on any given day. And also when I plan, I'm in the midst of planning one of my 2024 tours right now. You'll hear more about it, of course, in a couple of months. But the planning process behind that, I'm looking at mileage days, and there's a couple of mileage days that I'm looking at. I'm like, those are more than I normally would do. And I'm reminded of things that I've said where I'd like to reduce miles, and I'm considering all of these things. Now, if I was going with a group, I think that sometimes one's personal limits may not be any other person's limits. So if I was riding with somebody who was doing far fewer miles in a day, you have to coordinate with all of that. If somebody who's used to going out really hard and doing 100-mile days or something like that, that's not my pace or my interest. So there's a lot of different coordinations with all of that. And so the pacing is certainly an issue when it comes to the riding speed during the day. I tend to like to ride all by myself, regardless of whether or not I'm with a group or not. Mainly because I just find myself, it gets in my head when I'm riding with other folks. The fact that, am I slowing someone down, or are they going too slow for me? It's all in there. Now, is that something I should probably work on? Yeah, probably. Maybe doing some more group rides would be a helpful thing for me in that sense. But where I am right now and how I like to enjoy my bicycle adventures, I like to pace myself at, my own pace. So when you do a solo ride, it is far easier to handle that. You have no competition whatsoever, nothing that influences you other than how you're feeling in that moment. And I think that is certainly an advantage. What about some of the challenges to solo touring? Well, I've talked about it actually on recent podcasts, safety concerns. I think that there are a lot of folks that when they ride without another person there are concerns for personal safety. Also your gear safety and things along those lines. Watching your gear while you're inside stores. There are a whole bunch of things that I have to deal with on any given solo tour that folks who ride with other people, or at least in a couple situation where there's two people, they don't have to deal with that at all. There's always that extra person to rely on. You don't have that when you're riding solo. I talked about loneliness on a prior podcast or a recent podcast. That certainly can be a factor for a lot of people. I know that loneliness for especially extroverts out there, and I guess I should semi-count myself amongst you, that's a factor that works against even considering a solo tour. It's really interesting because when I will go on message boards and things like that, subreddits and whatnot, and people are trolling for a companion to ride with, I always sit there and go, boy, why are you waiting for someone to ride with? Because my frame of reference is always around solo riding. Well, for folks who don't want to do that, who experience loneliness in a really prodigious way, that is an understandable downside, or at least an understandable challenge to solo riding. So loneliness is certainly a factor. Another thing might be expense. I haven't talked about expenses so much on the pod in recent years, but I think it's worth mentioning it here and now. When you don't have somebody else that you're riding with, there are expenses that you incur that are absolutely not splittable. let's say that you're riding as a couple and you're looking at a campsite or maybe even a motel as a potential option, and you're going to be there together in one particular spot or one particular room. Well, you're able to split those expenses 50-50. If you're with a small group, you're able to split campsites, car camping campsites often amongst a whole group of people. I've done that before in California. I remember very explicitly one year. And that makes your camping and your lodging, your overall overnights much, much cheaper when you are paying for overnight accommodations in any way, shape, or form. Groups, always cheaper. Individual, solo, always going to be your maximum. So those are some of the things that I would mention as the challenges for solo touring. What can you do to mitigate those things? And this I can definitely speak to because I have spent my entire bicycle travel career, as it were, mitigating these solo touring challenges. I've even talked about them on very recent episodes. So, of course, episode 340, very recent episode on safety. I'll just underscore, if you haven't listened to that episode yet, first of all, go fix that. Second of all, summary, planning, and preparation is really key to mitigating safety concerns when you are out there, whether it's your personal safety or your gear safety. How you approach things from a planning and preparation perspective really, really makes a big difference there. When it comes to loneliness, and I did mention this before, that was episode 341, talking about the mental side of bicycle touring. By the way, I've got some nice feedback on that episode. Thank you for that. That was a topic that it was a little reluctant to maybe tackle, but it sounds like it was helpful for folks. So thanks for letting me know that. Being present and in the moment when you are experiencing those negative feelings is really, really helpful. And then you may find that you perceive it to be a negative feeling, but really what it is it's reinforcing something that's positive. If you're lonely, if you're missing loved ones back home, that's really reinforcing the positive feelings that you have. The absence of that is really the negative feeling, but it's really reinforcing that positive feeling of how you feel about them. That's an insightful thing. Not to get all therapy-like on you or anything like that, but having ways to connect when you need to with the people that you need to connect with when you're feeling those feelings of loneliness can be a very helpful thing. We talked a little bit about that again on episode 341 of the pod, so go check that out. One thing that I'll mention, and I have on prior podcasts, when it comes to your gear, I think that while it is natural to fear leaving your bike and leaving your panniers or whatever it is, your bike packing bags, whatever it is that's holding your gear while you go someplace like a grocery store comes to mind first and foremost. One thing I'll mention is your gear is way safer than you probably think it is, unless you're in a situation where your perception is that it's a place where things could really walk away from you. Most of the places where we're touring are in reasonably safe places for leaving your bags for a little bit unattended. Of course, in cities and in other places where maybe theft is a higher concern, obviously you have to go with your spidey sense, I think, as I said on the safety episode. But I do think that as long as you're stopping mindfully, your gear is probably going to be safe. And like I've mentioned, I literally never had anything taken from my bicycle or haven't had my bike stolen except in my own hallway in DC. I mean, it's just like, it's funny how we assign higher degrees of unsafeness in our head to places that we aren't as familiar with, when the reality is where we are familiar, we maybe discount things a little bit just because we have more exposure to it and we're maybe a little more complacent. I would say that generally speaking, your gear is probably pretty safe wherever you're going as a solo rider, with exceptions. Follow your spidey sense. There you go. Go listen to those past episodes for more on that. One other thing that I should mention in terms of mitigating the challenges was talking about the expenses. It's more expensive to ride solo than it is in a group. And I would say they go all the way back to Pedalshift 045, Pedalshift episode number 45, to talk about ways that you can reduce costs. In that episode, and boy, it's an oldie but a goodie. I should check if we've done that as a best of. That may have to make a reappearance at some point. Camping over hotels. I mean, roof lodging is almost always going to be more expensive. I found a place where camping actually is more expensive than the roof lodging options. Maybe I'll talk about that in a few months. Crazy. Cooking your own food, finding other ways to mitigate those costs. You can find ways as a solo rider to find other places to make your entire trip cheaper, if that is a concern for you. If you would like to choose solo riding, but expense is an issue, there are ways to find savings where you can. So in any event, that's the world of solo riding. And I've given you an earful of that through the years because the vast majority of the rides that I document here on the podcast are solo riding. Well, let's talk a little bit about group riding and why that might be something you would want to consider. Well, first of all, group riding is all about camaraderie, sense of community that's literally rolling with you. And one other thing that I would maybe add in here is that sometimes your solo rides end up turning into a group ride. I know some of mine have. When I have been riding, you end up hooking up with people that are going the same direction as you, and you end up camping in the same places along the way. So you may inadvertently find that sense of community in camp that continues for more than just one day. It is a wonderful thing, especially if you're feeling a little bit in need of other people to talk to. It can be a really good thing. So having that from the jump and starting and being in a group from the jump, that can be a really, really helpful thing as part of your ride. It may give you something different too. And we talked about that a little bit earlier when in a solo ride, you can use that for self-discovery or maybe solve some problems that are inside of your head. Well, the sense of camaraderie and community, that's another thing that is really, really helpful with all of that. You also get a chance to share your experiences with other people. I will say some of my better memories that I have with bicycle travel happen to be with other people involved. And that's the stories that I repeat probably far too many times for you on this podcast. But also just the memories of some of the trips, do they stick a little bit more in my head because other people were there? Maybe. I don't have a good explanation for that, but I do think that that's true, that when an experience is shared, that reinforces some of that. Sharing those responsibilities, and that's the flip side of the downside of solo riding. You can be a lookout for the bikes. One night, maybe you're the person who cooks or prepares food, and then another night it's cleaning. Sharing those types of responsibilities while you are riding can make for a better ride. Maybe you love to cook, but you hate to clean it up, and then the other person you're with is the exact opposite. That can be a really helpful pairing. You can benefit from that type of a thing. So let's talk a little bit about the challenges that come with group touring. And these I sort of mentioned in the solo section. The logistics of planning and executing a group tour are definitely one of the challenges, or a pair of challenges that come out with this. When you're riding with folks, sometimes you end up with clashing personalities. Maybe folks are going to be riding at different speeds than you, and that ends up creating a problem in terms of coordinating the days that you're riding. Different expectations. Some folks are really going to be adamant about stopping in particular places, while other people would really like to make miles. Different expectations for a day can really create some conflict. Different priorities. Some folks are there to be there for the ride itself, and they're going to enjoy the journey more than the destination. Other people are much more about the destination and getting there and camping and enjoying an evening. Sleep times, whether or not you want to drink at the end of the day in camp. Do you want to go out to eat, or are you trying to save a few bucks and you want to cook in camp? Just some of the differing priorities that could happen with a group that's there. So how do you mitigate some of these challenges? Well, I think that the importance of communication it cannot be understated. Talking to the folks who are in your group, whether it's one person or multiple people, really, really, really important, especially when you're feeling a growing sense of conflict on any of these topics. Leadership is something that I think is understated in this area, but I think it's important. Having somebody to step up to help resolve conflict can be a really helpful thing, but also maybe somebody that can break some ties or otherwise help with the group dynamics in all of that. Leadership's really, really important, especially for a larger group. I do think that teamwork is probably the most essential thing when it comes to a group ride. Again, this could be two people or more, but, division of labor, making sure that things are evenly spread out in terms of what needs to get done. If somebody's got a mechanical and there's one person in the group who is the better mechanic that can help with that, they're taking on a heavier burden. So hopefully someone is lessening their other burdens for them. Maybe they're not going to have to cook their dinner that night. There's all sorts of different ways to handle all of that, but but teamwork is a really essential thing, I think, in a larger group ride. I've been able to experience a few larger group rides, and that is essential to show that division of labor. Of course, the biggest ride that I was ever on was one of my first rides, and that was the climate ride. And just having that real division of labor and that kind of setup was incredibly important. It was so professionally run, and it would not have succeeded except for the fact that there was a real sense of camaraderie and teamwork that went in that group, and it made it very successful for the rest of us. I would say that my best offer for more information would be from one of my favorite chats that I've had on the show, and that's episode 163 with Guthrie Straw, a good friend of the show, talking about kind of how one handles group dynamics. And he had some great insights on that. And so I would definitely invite you to take a listen to that program from before for more information on that. Okay, so we've got challenges. We've got mitigations of these challenges for both group and solo. How do you end up making a decision on here? I think that is up to you. I mean, I clearly have a preference, and I've stated it here on the show a million times, but it's a personal fit based on your preferences and really your goals too. Sometimes you may find that a solo tour is a much better fit for your goal. Let's say that you are very fit and you really want to bang out miles. You want to do a little bit of a Sufferfest 2024 or something like that and just do a really hard miles, and the folks that would potentially be in your group are maybe not as experienced or maybe not as physically capable of doing that. That's when you're going to want to consider doing as a solo rider. Whereas in other scenarios, you may want to slow it down and be with that group and enjoy the camaraderie a little bit more. You're not trying to bang out a ton of miles, but maybe you're going to bring it down to a 30, 40, or 50 mile day. And just really more focused on the camping at the end, or the brew tour that you're going to be going on each night after you get out of your hotel or something along those lines. Lots of different options in there, but what your goals are probably going to be a real determining factor in all of that. Your personality too, I think, is a real big factor. If you're a super huge extrovert, solo touring may not be for you unless you're riding in a place where there's a ton of folks touring at the same time, and you'll end up in campgrounds where you're guaranteed that there are going to be people there to hang out with. I would say that you may want to consider something that is obvious, really, when you think about it. How about a little of both, right? Combining a solo sections of your ride with maybe meeting up with some folks and doing some group touring within the same journey. Of course, I just literally did that this summer when I met up with Mysterious James. There's also the possibility of riding very well-trodden routes, as I mentioned before, where the possibility of running into people at the end of your day in any given campground is pretty high. So you end up with the solo ride, but the group kind of dynamic maybe in the evening. Now, are you always going to have that? No. Are people in your campground always going to be receptive to a hello? Maybe not. So you've got to be prepared for all of these types of things when you consider this kind of hybrid model of solo and group riding. But I do think it's something to consider as part of all of that. I will say that as much as I like riding solo, I do like the end of the day kind of camaraderie in camp. And so when I do those West Coast tours, I do enjoy hanging out and at least saying hello to some folks. Although it's been interesting the last few years, I think as COVID has in the middle of COVID and then as COVID waned, I'm noticing fewer people in these camps on the Pacific route. Well, compared to in past years. Now, maybe that's going to rebound in the next couple of years, but interesting, a very interesting thing that I've noted. Maybe it's just bad luck and it's a low sample size, but something to be mindful of when you are planning some type of thing. You can't necessarily be guaranteed of the outcome that you would like. I think that probably goes without saying. All right, so let's wrap it up here. There is no one size fits all answer. I think that most people would like a little of both, a little bit of solo and a little bit of group. I think that the choice between solo and group absolutely depends on your individual preferences and the circumstances surrounding your ride, the goals of your ride. You should make sure that you are honoring both of those things as you plan your ride. Don't try to force yourself into group rides if you are a real introvert and don't really like it. It's not worth compromising how you feel and how you ride unless there's some compelling reason. Maybe you really do want to connect with one particular person or a group of people. Then, you know what? Give it a shot. See how it goes. But, if you find that it's not for you, don't feel like you have to do a group ride or have to do a solo ride just because other people say it's good. Some dopey guy on a podcast should not be determining whether or not your ride is successful or not successful based on if you're riding with a group or with just by yourself. Go with what your own vibe is. Ride your ride. I think somebody said that once. Another thing to consider is you really want to reflect on your touring goals, and that is going to be a real determiner of whether or not it makes sense to go solo or in a group, especially if you're, I could go either way on it. So that's it. Whether you're going solo or in a group or both, I hope you enjoy your next bicycling adventure. Quick sidebar here. I want to mention that we've got a wonderful, wonderful November on the way here. A whole bunch of fantastic shows that I've got mapped out for the rest of the month. Of course, we had this episode here where we talked about the interesting topic of solo versus group riding. Next week, as threatened, we've got a fall tour preview, and it was a real box checker of a tour. So check out the tour preview next week on the pod. The following week, the actual tour journal of this. It's just going to be a 1-episode tour journal, a short tour, but worth mentioning and worth bringing to you. And then the following week, I've got an interview in the works. Interview hasn't happened yet as I'm sitting here talking right now, and I usually don't like to jinx interviews because things happen from time to time. Schedules get changed, and I hate to promise things before they actually are recorded. So interview is in the works. It's on a topic I've been dying to have a conversation about and then to share with all of you. That is coming up later on in the month. Really fun November coming up for you here on the pod.
And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedalshift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedalshift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community. Expanding into live shows and covering new tours. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one-shot and annual options if you're not into the small monthly thing. Check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lean, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Didis, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Telgadis, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Mr. T, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Cody Florchinger, Tom Beninati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Drew Porter, Byron Patterson, Joaquin Robber, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Henkel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Aviles Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Jody Zaranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtal, Reinhard Biggle, Greg Middlemiss, Connie Moore, William Gothman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Latoile Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Ronald Paroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafner, Misha LeBlanc, Ari Messenger, David Grotke, Todd Grossbeck, Wally Estrella, Sue Reinert, John Lico, Stephen Granada, Philip Mueller, Robert Lackey, Dominic Carroll, Jackie McCullum, John Hickman, Carl Presseau, David Neves, Patty Louise, Terry Fitzgerald, Peter Steinmetz, Timothy Fitzpatrick, Michael Azuski, Hank O'Donnell, David Zanoni, David Weil, Matthew Sponseller, Chad Reno, Spartan Dale, Carolyn Ferguson, Peggy Littlefield, Lauren Allensmith, Eric Burns, Thomas Pearl, Darren McKibben, Richard Stewart, Dave Fletcher, Jack Smith, Luke Parkinson, Ryan Patterson, Cyrus Faravar, John Gardner, Sam Scruggs, Dwight Pintinger, Connie Bowder, Rob Merrifield, and thanks to all past and anonymous folks for helping make this show happen.
Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.